As the eerie hum filled the room, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The woman's presence was overwhelming, suffocating, and it seemed as though the walls of my room had disappeared, leaving only her and the oppressive darkness that surrounded her. Her long black hair cascaded like a waterfall, but there was no beauty in it, only an unsettling, unnatural stillness that made it seem as if it were part of the void itself. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen in place as though every muscle had been locked by an invisible force. Her feet, bare and pale, glided over the floor like a whisper of wind. She stepped closer, each movement synchronized with the sound of her haunting, wordless chant. The rhythm of her dance grew more intense, her body jerking and twisting in ways that seemed physically impossible. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was as if my very soul was being drawn to her, and the closer she got, the more I felt the weight of something ancient and powerful pressing down on me. And then I heard her voice. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably clear, cutting through the thick silence in my room. It wasn't words I recognized, no language I knew. It was a series of sounds, rhythmic and melodic, like an ancient song sung by something older than time itself. The song wrapped itself around my mind, pulling at my thoughts, twisting them into something foreign, something dark. I could feel my consciousness slipping, my mind becoming more and more distant as though I were losing myself to the rhythm of her dance. But something in me, the last shred of resistance, fought against it. A surge of adrenaline rushed through my veins, and I forced my body to move, even if just a little. My hand twitched, and with every ounce of strength, I broke free from the trance, gasping for breath as though I had been submerged in water. The woman's smile widened, but her eyes, they remained as empty as before, like two voids in the middle of her face. She raised her arm, her long fingers curling toward me, her nails sharp and gleaming in the dim light. I knew what she wanted. She wanted to pull me into her dance, to take my very soul as she had done to Luca, and I couldn't let her. With a burst of energy, I leapt from the bed, scrambling for the door. My feet were unsteady, my movements sluggish as if the weight of her presence still clung to me, holding me back. I stumbled into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But I didn't stop. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away. But the house, my house, seemed to stretch, the walls bending and shifting like a maze. I turned corners only to find myself in places I didn't recognize. The familiar scent of my home was replaced by the damp, earthy smell of the forest, the same scent from that night with Luca. I knew where I was now, the woods. But I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to face her again. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to turn back, my feet carried me forward, down a narrow, winding path. The trees loomed overhead like specters, their branches swaying as if whispering something dark to each other. I could hear her, closer now, the sound of her dance, her humming, echoing through the trees. She was right behind me, just out of sight, but I could feel her presence like a shadow crawling along my skin. Panic surged through me as I broke into a sprint, my legs burning with the effort, but the woods seemed endless. I wasn't making progress. It was as if I was running in place, as though the forest itself was trapping me, keeping me from escaping. And then, I saw her. She stood at the edge of a clearing, her black eyes fixed on me, her body swaying with that unnatural rhythm. Her smile stretched impossibly wide, and her arms raised toward the sky as if summoning something. I knew what she was doing. She was calling the darkness to take me, just as she had taken Luca. But I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let her win. I turned and ran, heart pounding, every breath labored, but this time I had a plan. I had heard whispers from the elders in the village about the old rituals, ways to break the curse, to stop the woman's power. They were old stories, but in my desperation, I had to believe they were true. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting a cold glow over the path ahead. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew one thing. I had to find the altar, the ritual site hidden deep in the forest. It was the only place where the woman could be confronted, where the power that bound her could be broken. I pushed through the dense undergrowth, my hands scratched and bruised by the sharp thorns, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The sound of her footsteps, the hum of her song was growing louder, closer. Then I saw it. A stone circle, half overgrown with moss and ivy, nestled at the base of an ancient oak tree, the altar. I rushed toward it, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled onto the stone slab. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew that this was my only chance. I had to perform the ritual. I had to. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the old words I had heard, the chants that were supposed to break the spell, but they were gone. The words slipped away like smoke, as though the forest itself was erasing them from my memory. I opened my eyes, desperate. And that's when I saw her again, right there, in the clearing, standing at the edge of the circle. Her eyes locked onto mine, her face twisted into a mask of fury. She raised her hands toward the sky, and the air around us seemed to darken, the trees groaning under the weight of her presence. I was trapped. There was no escaping now. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't alone. Luca, his face, pale and lifeless, emerged from the shadows. His body was no longer the friend I had known, but a hollow shell. His eyes wide and empty, the same black voids that the woman wore. He reached out to me, but his hand was cold, his skin rigid, as if he had been a part of her for too long. The woman stepped forward, her smile twisting into something more sinister. She spoke, but it wasn't her voice. It was Luca's. His voice distorted and layered with an unnatural echo. "You can't escape her. She has already taken you." I trembled, stepping backward, but my foot hit something hard, the stone altar. I was at its edge, trapped. But as I glanced around in fear, I saw something flickering in the distance. Light. A soft, warm glow, cutting through the thick fog that now blanketed the forest. It was the village. I could hear the voices of the villagers calling to me, urging me to come home. They had found me. They had come to rescue me. I looked back at Luca, his hollow eyes pleading for my surrender. The woman stood behind him, her arms raised as though ready to strike, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to let her take me. With a final burst of strength, I pushed past Luca's ghostly form, running toward the light. The woman's laughter echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to escape. And when I finally reached the edge of the forest, I stumbled into the arms of the villagers. They helped me to my feet, their faces filled with concern and relief. I looked around, but there was no sign of the woman, no trace of the dark forces that had haunted me. It was over, but as I walked away from the forest, I knew deep down that the curse wasn't gone. The woman hadn't been defeated. She had simply retreated into the shadows, waiting, watching, biding her time. And one day, she would return, and I would be ready.